The armory smelled of gun, oil, and solitude. Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez sat alone at the cleaning station, her hands moving through the familiar ritual of disassembling an M4 carbine that did not belong to her. 3 months of this. 3 months of cleaning other soldiers' weapons while her own rifle sat locked in a case she was no longer authorized to carry. Footsteps approached in the corridor outside. 2 operators from Bravo Team passed the open doorway, their conversation dying the moment they saw her. One nodded, a gesture so small it barely qualified as acknowledgement. The other looked away entirely. Then they were gone, their voices resuming once they had put sufficient distance between themselves and whatever contamination she represented. She had become a ghost in her own unit. The woman who had disobeyed orders in Kandahar. The liability. The problem that command had solved by making her invisible. Vasquez returned her attention to the rifle. The bolt carrier group came apart in her hands with mechanical precision. She had cleaned this same weapon twice already this week. It did not need cleaning. Nothing in this armory needed cleaning. But the work gave her hands something to do while her mind processed what she had become. A decorated sniper reduced to janitor, a warrior reduced to waiting. The radio on the workbench crackled to life. She was not supposed to have it. Tactical frequencies were restricted to active operators, and she was anything but active. But old habits died hard, and no one checked the armory anymore. No one checked on her at all. A voice cut through the static. Vanguard Base, this is Ranger 2-6. We have contact. I say again, we have troops in contact. Coordinates follow. Vasquez's hands stopped moving. She knew those coordinates. The Karangal Valley, eastern approach. Bad terrain. Limited cover. If a patrol got hit there, they would have nowhere to run. The transmission continued, more urgent now. Multiple enemy positions on high ground. We are pinned. Requesting immediate support. Her body tensed in ways she could not control. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to grab her rifle, to do what she had trained 15 years to do. Instead, she sat in an empty armory, holding pieces of someone else's weapon, listening to soldiers die. Across the base, Specialist Maria Torres hunched over her console in the communications center. The transmission from Ranger 2-6 filled the room, and every operator present had stopped what they were doing to listen. Vanguard, we have 3 wounded, 1 critical. Enemy has us bracketed from 3 sides. We cannot move. How copy? Torres responded immediately, her voice steady despite the acid churning in her stomach. Ranger 2-6, Vanguard copies all. QRF is spinning up. Hold your position. She turned to find Captain Daniel Reeves already entering the room, his face tight with controlled urgency. Reeves was FOB Vanguard's commanding officer, a man who ran his base like a machine and tolerated no deviation from protocol. Torres had seen him dress down senior NCOs for minor infractions. She had never seen him hesitate. He was not hesitating now. Give me the situation, he ordered. Torres pulled up the tactical display. Ranger Patrol hit in the Karangal, eastern grid. 12 men, 3 wounded. Enemy has elevated positions on 3 sides. They are completely pinned. Reeves studied the display. His jaw tightened as he absorbed the geometry of the ambush. Where's our QRF? For minutes to launch, Torres replied. Sergeant Morrison's team. Good. Get them moving. Torres hesitated. There was something else she needed to say, and she knew how Reeves would react. But the Rangers were dying, and she could not stay silent. Sir, she said carefully, there's another option. Vasquez knows that terrain. She did Overwatch in the Karangal for 6 months, and she is the best long-range shooter on this base. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Reeves turned to face her, his expression hardening into something Torres had seen before. The look he got whenever someone mentioned that name. Vasquez is not an option, he said flatly. Sir, with respect, she could provide immediate fire support while the QRF moves into position. Those Rangers need every advantage we can give them. Reeves stepped closer, lowering his voice in a way that made his words more threatening, not less. Sergeant Vasquez is confined to support duties pending review. Her judgment cannot be trusted. What happened in Kandahar proved that. I will not send an unstable operator into a combat situation and risk more lives because she decides to go off script again. Torres wanted to argue. She had read the Kandahar report. She knew what Vasquez had actually done, and it was not what Reeves made it sound like. But the captain was already turning away. The discussion closed. Launch the QRF, he ordered. Standard package. That is how we handle this. Before Torres could respond, a shadow appeared in the doorway. Elena Vasquez stood at the threshold of the communications center, her presence filling the space in a way that made everyone suddenly aware of her. She was not tall, but something about the way she carried herself suggested a coiled energy, a readiness that years of combat had burned into her bones. I heard the transmission, Vasquez said. Her voice was calm, almost soft. Let me go with the QRF. Reeves turned slowly. His face cycled through surprise, anger, and finally a cold dismissal that settled over his features like a mask. You're not authorized to be monitoring tactical frequencies, Sergeant. 12 Rangers are pinned down in terrain I know better than anyone on this base. I can help them. You can return to your duties in the armory. Reeves took a step toward her. That is not a suggestion. The two sergeants in the room exchanged glances. The tension between Vasquez and the captain was not new, but there was something different in the air now, something that felt like a line being drawn. Now, before we continue, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? What state or country? Drop in the comments. I want to know. And while you're thinking about that, think about this too. Had you ever been in a situation where someone refused to let you help, where they looked right through you like you did not matter? Because that is exactly where Elena Vasquez is standing right now. She knows she can save those Rangers. She knows in her bones. But the man in charge has already decided what she is worth. Vasquez held Reeves's gaze without flinching. She had faced enemy fighters, survived ambushes, made shots that other snipers called impossible. This man did not frighten her. Those men are going to die, she said quietly. And whose fault will that be? Reeves replied, not mine. I am following protocol. I am sending qualified operators. What I am not doing is sending someone who has already proven she cannot follow orders when it matters. Kandahar, Vasquez said. The word hung between them. Yes, Kandahar, where you decided your judgment mattered more than your commanding officers. Where you went off mission and nearly caused an international incident. Where I saved 12 civilians from being executed. Reeves's expression did not change. Return to the armory, Sergeant. That is a direct order. If I find you monitoring tactical frequencies again, I will have you confined to quarters. For a long moment, Vasquez did not move. Torres watched her, watching the calculation happening behind those dark eyes. Whatever Vasquez was thinking, she kept it to herself. She nodded once, turned, and walked out of the communications center without another word. Reeves exhaled. Get that QRF moving, he told Torres. And make sure Vasquez stays where she belongs. Torres acknowledged the order, but her eyes lingered on the empty doorway where Vasquez had stood. Something in the way the sergeant had left felt wrong. Not defeated, not compliant, decided. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb pressed his back against the crumbling wall and tried to count his men through the dust and chaos. 12 Rangers had walked into this village 40 minutes ago. Now 3 of them were bleeding, 1 was dying, and the rest were scattered behind whatever cover they could find while enemy rounds tore the air above their heads. Another burst of automatic fire raked the wall 6 inches from his position. Stone chips sprayed across his face. Webb did not flinch. Flinching was a luxury he could not afford. Sergeant Okonkwo, he called out. Status on the wounded. A voice responded from behind, an overturned cart 15 meters away. Patterson took one in the shoulder, through and through. Briggs caught shrapnel in both legs, but he can move. Morrison is the problem. How bad? Gut shot. Medic has him stabilized, but he needs surgery. Soon. Webb processed this information in the space between heartbeats. Morrison was 22 years old. He had a girlfriend back in Georgia who sent him cookies every month. He was going to die in this village if they did not get him out. Webb keyed his radio. Vanguard, Ranger 2-6. Sitrep follows. We have 12 personnel, 3 wounded, 1 critical. Enemy strength estimated 20 to 30 fighters in fortified elevated positions north, west, and south of our location. We have attempted to break contact twice. Both attempts driven back by concentrated fire. Ammunition status is yellow. Request immediate extraction and close air support. The response came through scratchy but clear. Ranger 26, Vanguard copies. QRF is en route. ETA 40 minutes. Air support ETA 90 minutes. Can you hold? Webb looked at his men. Looked at the blood soaking through Morrison's bandages. Looked at the enemy positions, ringing them like wolves around wounded prey. We will hold, he said, because there was nothing else to say. A sound reached him from his right. Not gunfire. Something worse. Hyperventilation. Panic taking root in a young soldier's chest. Private Jennings was pressed flat against a pile of rubble, his rifle clutched to his chest, his eyes wide and unfocused. He was 19. This was his third patrol. Nothing in his training had prepared him for being trapped in a kill zone with no way out. Webb moved without thinking, staying low, crossing the 5 meters between them in a controlled rush that drew fire but not hits. He slid into cover beside Jennings and put a hand on the young man's shoulder. Jennings, look at me. The private's eyes darted everywhere except Webb's face. His breathing came in short, sharp gasps. He was seconds away from doing something stupid, something that would get him killed. Private Jennings, Webb said, and this time his voice carried the weight of every firefight he had ever survived. Look at me right now. Something in the command cut through the panic. Jennings's eyes finally locked onto Webb's. You are a ranger, Webb told him. You trained for this. Your brothers need you. I need you. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to breathe. You're going to check your magazine. And you're going to cover that alley on my signal. Can you do that? Jennings swallowed. The wild terror in his eyes receded, replaced by something fragile but functional. He nodded. Good man. Webb squeezed his shoulder once, then turned his attention back to the perimeter. Okonkwo had repositioned 2 men to cover the northern approach. Corporal Davis was doing the same for the south. They were professionals. They knew how to fight. But Webb could see the truth in their faces, the same calculation he had already made. 40 minutes was a long time. 90 minutes was forever. Movement to the west. Webb raised his rifle and watched 3 enemy fighters dart between buildings, probing closer. Testing. They were not attacking yet, because they did not need to. They had time. They had ammunition. They had the high ground. All they had to do was wait for the Rangers to run dry. Webb dropped one of the fighters with a controlled burst. The other 2 vanished into cover. A small victory. One that cost him rounds he could not spare. Sergeant Webb. Davis's voice carried across the courtyard. We have a problem. Webb moved to a position where he could see what Davis was pointing at. The eastern ridge, a kilometer out, overlooking the entire valley. Figures were moving along it. A lot of figures. Reinforcements, Davis said. I count at least 15, maybe 20. Webb watched the distant shapes flowing down toward the village. Fresh fighters. Fresh ammunition. Fresh enthusiasm for killing Americans. The math changed in his head. 40 minutes had been optimistic. With reinforcements arriving, the enemy would not wait. They would assault soon, before the QRF could arrive. They would overwhelm the Rangers with numbers and firepower, and 12 soldiers would die in a village whose name most Americans would never learn. He made his way back to Okonkwo, keeping low, moving through rubble that had once been someone's home. The sergeant was checking Morrison's bandages. The young soldier's face had gone gray, his lips pale. He was conscious but fading. How long does he have? Webb asked quietly. Okonkwo did not look up. Maybe an hour. Maybe less. If we do not get him to a surgeon, he is not going home. Webb knelt beside Morrison. The kid's eyes found his face and held on like Webb was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to chaos. Staff Sergeant, Morrison whispered, I do not want to die here. You are not going to die here, Webb told him. You're going to see Georgia again. You're going to marry that girl who sends you cookies. And you're going to name your first kid after me, because I am about to get you out of this. Morrison tried to smile. It came out as a grimace of pain. Webb stood and pulled Okonkwo aside. His voice dropped to something barely above a breath. The truth was not something the others needed to hear. We have enemy reinforcements inbound from the east. At least 15 additional fighters. QRF is 40 minutes out. Air is 90. We are low on ammunition, and we cannot move without taking more casualties. Okonkwo's expression did not change, but his eyes told Webb everything. He understood. They both understood. "What do we do?" the sergeant asked. Webb looked at his men. 12 Rangers who had followed him into this valley. 12 soldiers who trusted him to bring them home. He thought about Morrison's girlfriend in Georgia. He thought about Jennings, 19 years old, fighting to control his fear. He thought about all the letters he might have to write if they did not find a way out of this. "We need a miracle," he said quietly. As if in answer, enemy fire intensified from the northern positions. The assault was beginning. Vasquez stood in the armory with her hands flat on the workbench, listening to men die. The radio she was not supposed to have crackled with Webb's voice. "Enemy assault in progress. We are holding, but ammunition critical. QRF status urgent." She closed her eyes. The sounds coming through that speaker painted pictures in her mind. The crack of incoming fire. The shorter bursts of outgoing rounds. Disciplined shots from soldiers conserving what little they had left. The desperate edge in a staff sergeant's voice as he tried to keep 12 men alive against impossible odds. She knew that terrain. She knew exactly where the enemy would position themselves, where the blind spots were, where a single shooter with the right rifle could change everything. And she was standing in an armory, forbidden from doing the one thing she had spent her entire adult life training to do. Across the base, Torres watched her screens with growing dread. The blue icon, representing the QRF, had stopped moving. "Vanguard, this is QRF lead. We have contact. Enemy pickets on the primary approach route. Taking effective fire. Request alternate routing." She pulled up a terrain map, searching for options. The valley had limited approaches. The enemy had clearly anticipated a relief force and positioned fighters to slow them down. Captain Reeves appeared at her shoulder. "Why have they stopped?" "Ambush on the approach route," Torres reported. "Enemy had pickets waiting. QRF is engaged and requesting alternate routing." Reeves studied the map. His jaw worked silently as he processed the deteriorating situation. Torres could see it in his face, the realization that his by-the-book response was failing. The Rangers were dying, and his rescue force was pinned down kilometers away. "What about southern approach?" he asked. Torres shook her head. "Terrain is impassable for vehicles. They would have to proceed on foot. It would add at least 30 minutes to their ETA. 30 minutes the Rangers did not have." Reeves knew it. Torres knew it. Everyone in the communications center knew it. "Sir," Torres said carefully, "Vasquez could be there in 20 minutes. She could provide overwatch while the QRF find another route. It might be enough to keep those Rangers alive." Something shifted in Reeves's expression. For a moment, Torres thought she saw doubt, the possibility that he might reconsider. Then his face hardened again, walls going up, protocol reasserting itself. "I already told you. Vasquez is not an option. Her judgment is compromised. What happened in Kandahar proves she cannot be trusted to follow orders when it matters. I will not compound this disaster by sending an unstable operator into a combat zone. Sir, those men are going to die. Then they will die following proper procedure." Reeves turned away. "Find the QRF an alternate route. That is an order." Torres watched him walk to the situation table, his back rigid with certainty. She thought about the Rangers in that valley. She thought about Vasquez in the armory. And she thought about what proper procedure was worth when soldiers came home in boxes. In the armory, Vasquez listened to the QRF report their contact. She heard Torres relay the news to Reeves. She heard Reeves refuse to send her, again, using the same words he always used. Kandahar, unstable, cannot be trusted. She had heard those words so many times they had lost their power to wound her. What she could not ignore was the static-filled voice of a staff sergeant trying to save his men, and the silence that would follow when he failed. Vasquez moved to the secured locker at the back of the armory. Her personal equipment was stored there, locked away like she was waiting for a reinstatement that might never come. She entered the combination and opened the case. Her rifle lay inside, an M110 semi-automatic sniper system, customized over 8 years of service. She had carried this weapon through 4 deployments. She had made shots with it that other snipers considered impossible. It knew her hands like a living thing. She lifted it out and checked the action. Clean, ready, waiting. This was not impulse. She understood exactly what she was doing. She was about to disobey a direct order from her commanding officer during an active combat operation. If the Rangers died anyway, she would face court-martial. If they lived, she might still face court-martial. Her career, whatever remained of it, would almost certainly end today. She thought about Kandahar, the village where she had been ordered not to engage, where command had decided that 12 Afghan civilians were acceptable losses in the interest of operational security. She had disobeyed that order. She had killed the fighters who were about to execute those civilians, including 4 children, and she had been punished for it ever since. They had called her judgment compromised. They had called her unstable. They had taken everything she had earned and locked in a box, just like her rifle. But those civilians were alive. Her children had grown a year older because she had refused to let them die. Vasquez loaded 3 magazines and secured them in her vest. She checked her sidearm and attached it to her thigh rig. She pulled on her pack, adjusted the straps, and lifted her rifle. 12 Rangers were going to live today. The cost to herself did not matter. She exited through the maintenance door at the rear of the armory, the one that led to the motor pool, without passing any checkpoints. The afternoon sun hit her face as she emerged into the open air. No one was watching. No one ever watched the armory. A tactical vehicle sat at the edge of the lot, keys in the ignition, waiting for a driver who was currently eating lunch. Vasquez climbed in, started the engine, and pulled out of the FOB through the service gate. By the time anyone noticed she was gone, the valley was already visible on the horizon. 20 minutes later, Torres felt something wrong. A prickling at the back of her neck, an instinct born from years of watching patterns and noticing when they broke. She pulled up the base security feeds and scanned them quickly. The armory camera showed an empty room. The workbench where Vasquez had been sitting was abandoned. Torres switched to the motor pool feed. A vehicle was missing. She checked the exit logs. Service gate, 14 minutes ago. No authorization recorded. She stood up from her console and walked out of the communications center without explanation. Her feet carried her to the armory, though she already knew what she would find. The room was empty. The secured locker at the back stood open. The rifle case inside was vacant. Torres stared at that empty case for a long moment. She thought about what she should do. Report immediately. Tell Reeves. Send MPs after Vasquez before she reached the valley. She thought about 12 Rangers with no ammunition and no hope. Then she closed the locker, walked out of the armory, and returned to her console without saying a word to anyone. Whatever happened next, Vasquez would have her chance. The road ended where the mountains began. Vasquez pulled the vehicle into a ravine, concealing it from aerial observation, and stepped out into the Afghan dust. From here, she would go on foot. 3 kilometers of vertical terrain stood between her and the ridge that overlooked the valley. She had studied these mountains 6 months ago, before Kandahar, before the reprimand, before they had decided she was too dangerous to use. She remembered every contour, every goat path, every position that offered sight lines into the killing ground below. There was exactly one approach that would give her dominance over the battlefield. One place where a single rifle could reach every enemy position. Getting there would require climbing through exposed terrain with no support, no backup, and no margin for error. She started moving. In the village, Webb watched another wave of fighters pull back after their probing assault. His men had held them off, but the cost was measured in brass casings scattered across the courtyard. They were down to magazines now. Individual magazines that soldiers counted and hoarded like water in the desert. Okonkwo appeared at his side, face grim. Morrison is fading. Medic says 30 minutes, maybe less. After that, nothing we do will matter. Webb looked at the young soldier lying in the shadow of the wall. Morrison's breathing had become shallow, his skin the color of old paper. The bandages on his stomach were soaked through. He was bleeding internally, and every minute that passed took him further from any chance of survival. QRF status, Webb asked. Still pinned. They found an alternate route, but it adds time. 45 minutes minimum. Webb did the math. It was not complicated. Morrison would be dead before help arrived. And once the enemy realized the Rangers were out of ammunition, the rest of them would follow. He keyed his radio. Vanguard, Ranger 2-6. We need that air support moved up. We're not going to last another 90 minutes. The response came back with the hollow efficiency of someone reading from a script. Ranger 2-6, air assets are committed to priority targets. Earliest available is unchanged. Recommend you hold position and concert ammunition. Webb wanted to throw the radio against the wall. Instead, he acknowledged the transmission and returned to the business of keeping his men alive for a few more minutes. High on a mountain, Vasquez climbed. Her lungs burned with the thin air. Her legs ached from the vertical scramble. The rifle on her back added 15 pounds to every step. None of it mattered. For the first time in 3 months, she felt like herself. This was what she was built for. Not cleaning other people's weapons. Not sitting in empty rooms, listening to condescension from officers who had never fired a shot in combat. This, the climb, the hunt, the singular focus of a predator moving toward prey. She reached a small plateau and paused to glass the valley below. Through her scope, the tactical picture crystallized into brutal clarity. The village sat in a natural bowl, surrounded on 3 sides by elevated terrain. Enemy fighters had positioned themselves perfectly, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered every approach. She counted them methodically. 7 distinct positions. 34 fighters total, more than Webb had estimated. Some had heavy weapons. All had the high ground. She shifted her scope north and found the QRF. 4 blue figures pinned behind a rock formation, taking sporadic fire from a ridge above them. They were not going anywhere. The enemy had anticipated reinforcements and planned accordingly. Vasquez lowered the scope and studied the geometry of the battle. The distances were extreme. The angles were difficult. Each shot she took would reveal her position and invite counterfire. She would have to relocate constantly, moving between positions faster than the enemy could react. It was possible, barely, if she did not miss. She began her final approach to the primary firing position, a narrow shelf of rock that offered sight lines to 6 of the 7 enemy positions. The 7th would require her to relocate east, exposing herself to observation during the movement. There was no perfect solution. There never was. The shelf was exactly where she remembered it. She settled into position, adjusting her rifle on its bipod, checking her range cards against the distances she had estimated. The enemy machine gun position was 847 meters away. The commander directing fighters from a rooftop was 923 meters. The reinforcement group on the eastern ridge was over 1,000. Wind from the northwest, 8 knots with gusts. Temperature affecting bullet drop. Humidity negligible. She made her calculations, adjusted her scope, and chambered the first round. Below her, 12 Rangers waited to die. They had held through 2 assaults. They would not survive a third. She keyed her radio to the Ranger tactical frequency. She did not identify herself. There was no need for them to know who she was. All they needed to know was that the equation had changed. Vanguard element, stay down. Help is here. In the village, Webb heard the transmission through a haze of exhaustion and despair. The voice was calm, almost gentle. Female. He did not recognize it. He looked at Okonkwo, who shook his head. Not their frequency. Not anyone from base. Not the QRF. Say again last. Webb transmitted. Identify yourself. No response. Just static and the distant crack of enemy rifles and the ragged breathing of men who had accepted they might not see tomorrow. Webb wondered if he had imagined it. Wondered if the stress had finally broken something in his mind. He had asked for a miracle. This felt like a hallucination. But something made him key his radio one more time. All elements, he ordered his squad, maintain positions, and stay low. He did not know why he said it. He did not know who had spoken on that frequency. But somewhere in the part of his brain that had kept him alive through 3 deployments, a spark of something dangerous flickered to life. Hope. Vasquez settled her cheek against the stock and let the world shrink to the space inside her scope. The machine gun position had been hammering the Rangers for the past hour. 2 fighters crouched behind a low stone wall, feeding belts into a PKM that chewed through the village below. 847 meters. Crosswind 8 knots from the northwest. She dialed her elevation, adjusted for wind, and placed her reticle on the gunner's center mass. She exhaled slowly. Between heartbeats, in that moment of perfect stillness that only snipers understood, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. A second later, the gunner slumped forward over his weapon. The loader reacted immediately, shoving his dead partner aside and grabbing for the gun. Vasquez had already cycled her bolt. Her second round took him through the chest before his hands reached the trigger. 2 shots, 2 kills. The machine gun fell silent. In the village, Webb watched the PKM position go quiet mid-burst. One moment, it was raking their cover with fire. The next, nothing. He turned to Okonkwo. Did we hit them? Negative. No one has angle on that position. Webb looked at the distant hillside where the machine gun crew had been. 2 bodies lay motionless behind the wall. Someone had killed them. Someone who was not in this village. The mysterious voice on the radio. Help is here. He did not have time to process it. Another enemy position opened fire, rounds cracking overhead. But the volume was diminished now. The loss of the machine gun had disrupted their coordinated assault. On the ridge, Vasquez was already moving. 15 seconds. That was how long she had before the enemy triangulated her shot and sent return fire to her position. She scrambled across loose rock, staying low, racing toward position 2. She reached it in 12 seconds and settled behind a boulder that gave her a new angle on the battlefield. Her scope found a rooftop where an enemy commander had been directing fighters. 923 meters. He was shouting into a radio, gesturing frantically, trying to figure out what had happened to his machine gun team. Vasquez steadied her breathing, adjusted for the increased distance. Fired. The commander dropped. His radio clattered across the rooftop and fell into the street below. She displaced again. Position 3. Another target acquired. A fighter with an RPG who was maneuvering toward a spot that would give him a clear shot at the Rangers. She dropped him before he could set up. For shots. For kills. The enemy's assault was falling apart. At FOB Vanguard, Torres listened to the tactical frequency with her heart pounding against her ribs. Webb's voice came through, confused but hopeful. Vanguard, Ranger 2-6. Enemy casualties from unknown source. Machine gun position eliminated. Enemy commander down. Someone is engaging from the eastern ridge, but we have no visual. Please advise. Torres kept her face neutral. She knew exactly who was on that ridge. She said nothing. Captain Reeves crossed the communication center in 3 quick strides. What was happening out there? Who was engaging? Unknown, sir, Torres replied. Rangers report precision fire from elevated position, but cannot identify the shooter. Reeves stood frozen for a moment, processing. Then something clicked behind his eyes. A terrible understanding that spread across his face like ice. Where's Vasquez? Torres did not answer. She did not need to. Reeves stormed to a terminal and pulled up base security logs. Service gate, 1 hour ago. Unauthorized vehicle departure. He switched to the armory feed, saw the empty room, the abandoned workbench. He checked the equipment locker records. Her rifle is gone, he said quietly. Then, louder, her rifle is gone. She took her weapon and left the base. He spun toward Torres. You knew, and you did not report it. Torres met his gaze without flinching. I knew she was the only chance those Rangers had. Reeves looked like he wanted to strike her. Instead, he grabbed his radio. All MP units, locate and detain Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez. She is AWOL and operating without authorization. Consider her armed and dangerous. Torres almost laughed. Armed and dangerous. That was exactly what Vasquez was. And right now, She was the only thing standing between 12 Rangers and a massacre. On the ridge, Vasquez took her fifth shot. A fighter who had been rallying others near the southern approach collapsed into the dust. The men around him scattered, diving for cover, searching desperately for a threat they could not see. Confusion rippled through the enemy positions. They were taking casualties from an invisible shooter. Their machine gun was dead. Their commander was dead. Every time someone tried to coordinate, another body hit the ground. The assault on the Rangers faltered. Fighters who had been advancing moments ago now pressed themselves against walls and rocks, afraid to move. The coordinated attack had become chaos. Webb watched it happen from the village. Watched the enemy momentum break like a wave against stone. Whoever was out there, whoever had answered his prayer for a miracle, they were methodically dismantling an ambush that should have killed his entire squad. He keyed his radio, broadcasting on the frequency where he had heard that calm female voice. Unknown element, this is Ranger 2-6. We see what you are doing. We owe you our lives. Please identify. Silence. Then, 3 words in that same quiet voice. Just stay down. Vasquez chambered another round and searched for her next target. The enemy had 34 fighters when she started. Now, they had 29. She was just getting started. Webb moved through the courtyard in a low crouch, using the lull in enemy fire to check on his men. The mysterious shooter had bought them time, and he intended to use every second of it. Okonkwo, get Morrison into better cover. Davis, redistribute ammunition. Everyone gives up 2 magazines to whoever is lowest. The Rangers responded with quiet efficiency. They were professionals. They knew a gift when they saw one, and they knew better than to waste it. Webb reached Morrison's position and knelt beside the young soldier. The medic had done everything possible, but Morrison's face told the truth. He was holding on through sheer willpower, refusing to die in a place so far from home. Still with us, Private? Morrison's eyes flickered open. Still here, Staff Sergeant. Someone is shooting. Someone is shooting, Webb agreed. And as long as they keep shooting, we're going to get you home. He moved on, checking positions, counting bodies. 7 enemy fighters laid dead from the sniper's precision fire. 7 men who had been trying to kill his squad an hour ago. The mathematics of the ambush had shifted dramatically, but they were still outnumbered and still low on ammunition. Webb, try the radio again. Unknown element, Ranger 2-6. Requesting status and identification. Static answered him. Whoever was out there had no interest in conversation. They were busy doing something far more important. On the eastern ridge, Vasquez tracked movement through her scope and felt her pulse quicken. The enemy had figured out her general direction. It had taken them longer than expected, which meant their leadership was degraded, but they were not stupid. They knew a sniper was killing them from the high ground, and they were doing something about it. 8 fighters had broken off from the main force and were moving toward the ridge. They spread out in a loose formation, covering each other, advancing through the rocks with the practiced movements of men who had hunted before. These were not conscripts. These were experienced fighters sent to kill her. Vasquez calculated her options. She could engage them now, but that would pull her attention away from the main force. The moment she stopped shooting at the village, the pressure on the Rangers would resume. Morrison would die. Maybe others too. She could ignore the hunters and keep engaging the primary targets. But 8 men moving toward her position would eventually find her. She was good. She was not immortal. If they got within 200 meters, she would be fighting for her life instead of saving the Rangers. The third option was more dangerous and more effective. She let the hunters advance. Let them climb closer to where they thought she was hiding. Then she turned her rifle toward the main enemy force and took a deliberate shot at a fighter near the western perimeter. The round cracked across the valley. The fighter dropped, and every eye in the hunting party locked onto the muzzle flash that had just revealed her position. They changed direction immediately, 8 men charging toward the spot where she had fired. They thought they had her. They thought they knew exactly where she was. They were wrong. Vasquez was already moving, scrambling across the ridge to a secondary position she had identified during her initial assessment. It overlooked the approach route the hunters would have to take. They were running toward a ghost while she positioned herself to watch them die. She reached the new position in 20 seconds, settled behind a rock formation, checked her sight lines. The hunters came into view 30 seconds later, moving fast, eager to kill the sniper who had been decimating their comrades. They were bunched too close together, their excitement overriding their training. Easy targets. Vasquez fired. The lead hunter dropped. She cycled her bolt and fired again. The second man fell before the first had finished collapsing. The remaining 6 tried to scatter, tried to find cover, but there was no cover from this angle. She had chosen the position specifically for its commanding view of the approach. Every rock they ran toward, she had already accounted for. 8 shots in 12 seconds. 8 bodies sprawled across the rocky slope. The hunting party had been annihilated. Vasquez allowed herself one breath, one moment to let her pulse slow. Then she shifted her rifle back toward the village and searched for more targets. In the main enemy positions, something broke. The fighters had watched their commander die. They had watched their machine gun crew die. They had watched 8 of their best hunters charge up the ridge and get slaughtered in seconds. They did not know they were facing one woman with a rifle. They did not know that the angel of death raining fire from the mountains was a soldier their own command had thrown away. All they knew was that something terrible was on that ridge, and it was killing everyone who tried to stop it. The first fighter abandoned his position and ran. Then another. The retreat spread through the enemy force like a virus, discipline crumbling as survival instinct took over. Webb watched it happen from the village. He watched fighters who had been ready to overrun his squad drop their coordinated assault and flee for the hills. He watched the ambush that should have killed 12 Rangers dissolve into chaos and terror. Okonkwo appeared beside him, face slack with disbelief. They are running. They are actually running. Webb counted the bodies he could see from his position. The machine gun crew, the commander on the rooftop, scattered fighters along the perimeter. The pile of corpses on the ridge where the hunting party had met its end. 15 dead, Okonkwo said quietly. Maybe more. One shooter did all of this. Webb keyed his radio, his voice steadier than he felt. Vanguard, Ranger 2-6. Enemy is breaking contact. I say again, enemy is breaking contact. They are retreating from all positions. Whatever is happening on that ridge, it is working. At FOB Vanguard, Torres allowed herself a small smile. She kept it hidden from Reeves, who stood at the tactical display with his face the color of ash. The captain had ordered MPs to find Vasquez. He had declared her AWOL. He had called her armed and dangerous. And while he had been doing all of that, she had been single-handedly routing an enemy force that had pinned down both a Ranger squad and a quick reaction force. Reeves said nothing. There was nothing to say. The woman he had sidelined, the soldier he had called unstable and untrustworthy, was saving lives he had been prepared to write off as acceptable losses. He would never admit it. Torres knew that. But somewhere behind his rigid expression, Captain Daniel Reeves was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. On the ridge, Vasquez watched the enemy retreat and felt nothing like satisfaction. The battle was not over. Scattered fighters were falling back to a stone building at the edge of the village, a fortified position with thick walls and narrow windows. They were regrouping, consolidating their remaining strength. And as long as that building stood, the Rangers could not move. Torres had been quietly feeding information up the chain of command for the past 30 minutes. Short bursts of data transmitted through back channels to contacts she had cultivated during 3 years of working communications. By the time the enemy began retreating from the village, Regional Command knew everything. They knew about the ambushed Rangers. They knew about the pinned QRF. And they knew that an unauthorized operator had walked into the war zone alone and turned the entire battle around with a rifle and impossible skill. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes received the reports at Forward Operating Base Griffin, 40 kilometers east. She was a 22-year veteran with combat deployments across 3 continents and a reputation for 2 things: tactical brilliance and zero tolerance for officers who let procedure override common sense. The situation at Vanguard had her full attention. She picked up the secure line and dialed Captain Reeves directly. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had sent soldiers into battle and brought most of them home. Captain Reeves, this is Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Regional Command. I need a full situation report on the Ranger element in the Korengal. I need to know exactly what is happening on that ridge. There was a pause on the other end. Torres watched Reeves from across the communications center as he straightened his posture and adopted the tone of a man who knew he was speaking to someone who could end his career. Colonel Hayes, the situation is complex. We have a Ranger squad that was ambushed during a routine patrol. Our QRF encountered resistance en route, and we have an unauthorized element that has inserted herself into the operation without orders. Unauthorized element, Hayes repeated. You mean Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez? Another pause. Yes, ma'am. Sergeant Vasquez departed this base without authorization approximately 90 minutes ago. She took her personal weapon and a vehicle. She is currently operating in the battle space without command approval. I have already issued orders for her detention. Hayes let the silence stretch. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped to something quieter and far more dangerous. Captain, I have been monitoring tactical communications for the past hour. I have heard your Rangers report enemy casualties from precision fire. I have heard them report that the enemy assault has collapsed. I have heard a staff sergeant say, and I quote, that whatever is happening on that ridge is working. So, I'm going to ask you one question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. She paused. Are the Rangers still alive? Reeves swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Current reports indicate all 12 Rangers are still combat effective. 3 wounded, 1 critical. And before Sergeant Vasquez engaged, what was their status? The silence told Hayes everything she needed to know. That is what I thought, she said. Stand by, Captain. I'm pulling Vasquez's file. At her desk in FOB Griffin, Hayes accessed the personnel database and brought up Elena Vasquez's service record. What she found made her lean back in her chair and exhale slowly. 15 years of service. For combat deployments. Marksmanship scores that read like fiction. Commendations from 3 different theater commanders. A Bronze Star with Valor Device. A reputation among special operations units as one of the most skilled precision shooters in the entire military. And then Kandahar. Hayes read the incident report twice. The official version described an operator who had disobeyed direct orders during a sensitive operation, compromising mission security and creating a diplomatic incident with local authorities. The classified annexes told a different story. Vasquez's unit had been conducting surveillance on a suspected insurgent meeting. Command had ordered them to observe and report only, not engage under any circumstances. Political sensitivities, diplomatic considerations, the kind of calculations that looked clean on paper and ignored the blood on the ground. During the observation, Vasquez identified 12 Afghan civilians being held at gunpoint. 4 of them were children. The insurgents were preparing to execute them as a demonstration of power. Vasquez's commanding officer had ordered her to hold position and not intervene. She had disobeyed. In 90 seconds, she had eliminated 6 fighters and scattered the rest. 12 civilians had lived. 4 children had gone home to their families. And Elena Vasquez had been reprimanded, stripped of her operational status, and assigned to clean rifles in an armory, while officers like Reeves called her unstable. Hayes closed the file. She had seen enough. She keyed her radio to the command frequency, ensuring that everyone at FOB Vanguard could hear what she was about to say. Captain Reeves, this is Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. I am assuming tactical authority over operations in the Korengal Valley effective immediately. All assets currently assigned to the Ranger Recovery Mission are to support Sergeant Vasquez's Overwatch position. That includes your QRF, any available air assets, and whatever else she needs to finish this. Reeves's voice came back tight, with barely controlled anger. Colonel, with respect, Vasquez is AWOL. She disobeyed direct orders. She has demonstrated a pattern of insubordination that calls her judgment into serious question. I cannot, in good conscience, support an operator who refuses to follow the chain of command. Hayes cut him off. Captain Reeves, that woman is the only reason you are not writing 12 letters to 12 families tonight. She is the only reason your QRF is not walking into a massacre. And she is the only reason I am not relieving you of command right now for failing to deploy your most capable asset when soldiers were dying. The communications center went silent. Torres watched Reeves's face cycle through shock, anger, and finally something that looked almost like fear. Hayes was not finished. You will support Sergeant Vasquez. You will provide her with whatever she requires. And when this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about Kandahar and why a soldier who saved 12 civilians, including 4 children, is cleaning weapons in your armory instead of doing her job. Do I make myself clear? Yes, ma'am. The words came out hollow. Defeated. Good. Hayes switched frequencies. QRF lead, this is Colonel Hayes. You have overwatch on the Eastern Ridge. Push forward. Sergeant Vasquez will cover your advance. The QRF leader's response carried audible relief. Acknowledged, Colonel. Moving now. Torres watched the tactical display as the blue icons representing the QRF began to advance again. They had been pinned for over an hour, unable to move, unable to help. Now, they were pushing forward with renewed purpose, knowing that someone on that ridge was watching over them. She allowed herself a moment. Just one small moment of hope in the middle of chaos. Vasquez had gone into that valley alone, defying orders, risking her career and her life. And now regional command was backing her. Now the full weight of military authority was aligned behind a woman who had been thrown away. Torres keyed her console and opened a direct channel to the frequency Vasquez had been using. Sergeant Vasquez, she transmitted, this is Vanguard Communications. Stand by for Colonel Hayes, Regional Command. A pause. Then that familiar calm voice, the same voice that had told the Rangers to stay down. Standing by. Torres patched Hayes through. The colonel's words were simple and direct. Sergeant Vasquez, this is Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. I have reviewed your file. I know what happened in Kandahar. And I know what you're doing right now. She paused. You were right then. You are right now. Finish this. That is an order. On the ridge, Vasquez listened to the words she had waited 3 months to hear. Her finger rested beside the trigger of her rifle. Her scope was trained on the fortified building where the remaining enemy fighters had consolidated. Acknowledged, Coronel. Vasquez out. She shifted her position and began planning her final approach. The battle was not over. But for the first time since Kandahar, she was not fighting alone. Vasquez allowed Hayes's words to settle in her chest. You were right. 3 words she had waited 3 months to hear from anyone in command. 3 words that changed nothing about the tactical situation and everything about why she was fighting. She keyed her radio. Colonel Hayes, current enemy, status follows. Main force is in retreat. Approximately 15 to 18 fighters remain combat effective. They have consolidated in a fortified position at the northern edge of the village. Stone construction, narrow windows, heavy weapons emplacement covering the primary extraction route. QRF cannot advance, and Rangers cannot withdraw as long as that position is active. Hayes responded immediately. What do you need? Time, Vasquez said. I need a reposition for a shot on their heavy gun. Once that is down, the QRF can move. You have whatever time you need. We will keep the channels clear. Vasquez lowered the radio and studied the fortified building through her scope. The enemy had chosen their fallback position well. Thick stone walls that would shrug off anything short of an airstrike. Windows barely wide enough for a rifle barrel. A DSHK heavy machine gun positioned to cover the only road out of the village. The Rangers were trapped. Every time someone tried to move Morrison toward the extraction point, that machine gun opened up. 3 times they had attempted it. 3 times they had been driven back. Morrison was fading. He did not have many more attempts left in him. In the village, Webb crouched behind a crumbling wall and watched the fortified building with growing desperation. The sniper on the ridge had performed miracles. Whoever she was, she had killed more than 15 enemy fighters and broken an ambush that should have slaughtered his entire squad. But she could not help them now. The building was too well protected. The angles were wrong. No amount of precision shooting could reach inside those stone walls. Okonkwo appeared at his side. Morrison is asking for water. He is conscious, but barely. Medic says we are out of time. Webb looked at the wounded soldier lying on a stretcher 20 meters away. Morrison's face had gone the color of old bone. His breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. He was dying by degrees, slipping away while his squad watched helplessly. We try again, Webb said. Everyone provides covering fire. We sprint for the extraction point and pray that gun jams. Okonkwo shook his head. That gun is not going to jam, and we do not have the ammunition for sustained covering fire. We try that. We lose more men. Then what do you suggest? I suggest we wait for whoever is on that ridge to figure something out. Because right now, she is the only card we have left to play. On the ridge, Vasquez had already figured it out. She just did not like the answer. The fortified building had exactly one vulnerability. A narrow window on the eastern face, no more than 18 inches wide, positioned at an angle that gave a direct line of sight to the heavy machine gun emplacement. If she could put a round through that window, she could hit the gunner. Maybe hit the ammunition stored beside him. Maybe silence the gun permanently. The problem was distance. 1,847 meters. Nearly 2 kilometers of thin mountain air, crosswinds, and bullet drop that would require calculations most snipers never had to make. At that range, a shot was not just difficult. It was theoretical. She had made long shots before. 1,400 meters in Helmand Province. 1,600 during a classified operation she was not supposed to discuss. But 1,800 was beyond anything she had attempted outside of controlled range conditions. And this was not a controlled range. This was a dying soldier, a trap squad, and one chance to get it right. Vasquez began her approach to the final position. The terrain between her current location and the optimal firing point was exposed. Rocky ground with minimal cover, overlooked by the fortified building. If the enemy spotted her moving, they would know exactly what she was attempting. They would reposition their gun or send fighters to intercept her. She moved slowly, deliberately, each step chosen to minimize her silhouette against the ridgeline. Each pause timed to coincide with moments when the enemy's attention was focused elsewhere. 20 minutes of careful movement. 20 minutes of controlled breathing and calculated risk. The sun shifted across the sky, changing the shadows, altering the angles. Sweat dripped into her eyes despite the mountain cold. She reached the final position as the afternoon light began to turn golden. A shelf of rock that jutted out from the ridge face, hidden from the fortified building by a natural fold in the terrain. From here, she could see the eastern window. From here, 1,847 meters separated her rifle from the man behind that heavy gun. Vasquez settled into position. She adjusted her bipod, checking the stability of the rock beneath her. She pulled out her range card and began her calculations. Distance, 1,847 meters. Elevation difference, minus 212 meters, shooting downhill. Wind from a northwest at 12 knots with gusts to 18. Temperature, 11 degrees Celsius, affecting powder burn and velocity. Humidity, negligible. Barometric pressure, lower than sea level due to altitude. She dialed her scope. The adjustments were extreme, pushing the optic to the edge of its design parameters. At this distance, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 2.5 seconds. It would drop over 40 feet from the point of aim. The slightest error in any variable would send the round wide by meters, not inches. She chambered around and pressed her cheek to the stock. Through the scope, the window resolved into clarity. 18 inches of opening. Behind it, the dark shape of the machine gun and the man who operated it. She could see his shoulder, his arm, a sliver of his torso. That was her target. That fragment of a human being 2 kilometers away, holding the lives of 12 Rangers in his hands. Vasquez slowed her breathing. Her heartbeat dropped into the steady rhythm that years of training had carved into her nervous system. The world shrank to the space between her eye and the scope, between her finger and the trigger, between this moment and the next. She keyed her radio one final time. Ranger 2-6, This is your overwatch. On my shot, move your critical casualty to the extraction point. You will have a clear path. Webb's voice came back, tight with hope and fear. Unknown element, confirm. You have a solution on that gun? Vasquez settled her reticle on the window. The crosswind gusted to 16 knots, and she adjusted fractionally, instinctively, trusting calculations she had made 1,000 times before. I have a solution, she said quietly. Stand by. Her finger moved to the trigger. Vasquez made her calculations one final time. Distance, 1,847 meters. Wind, northwest at 12 knots, gusting to 18. The gust cycle was irregular, coming in waves every 15 to 20 seconds. She would have to time her shot between gusts, in that brief window when the air held still enough for the bullet to fly true. Elevation, negative 212 meters. Shooting downhill changed the equation. Gravity would pull the bullet differently than on a flat range. She adjusted her hold, compensating for the angle. Temperature, 11 degrees Celsius. Cold air was denser than warm air. The bullet would fly slightly higher than it would on a summer day. Another adjustment. Another variable folded into the calculation. The bullet itself would be in flight for nearly 2.5 seconds. In that time, it would travel almost 2 kilometers, dropping over 40 feet from the point of aim, curving with the wind, slowing as air resistance bled away its velocity. At the end of that journey, it needed to pass through an 18-inch window and strike a target she could barely see. She had one shot, one chance. Everything came down to the next few seconds. Vasquez keyed her radio. Her voice was steady, almost soft. Ranger 2-6, on my shot. Move your casualty to extraction. Do not hesitate. Do not wait for confirmation. When you hear that gun go silent, you run. Webb's response came through tight, with controlled tension. Acknowledged. We are ready. She lowered the radio and settled deeper into her position. The stock of her rifle pressed against her shoulder like an extension of her body. Her cheek found a familiar well point on the stock. Her eye aligned with the scope. The world narrowed. At FOB Vanguard, Torres watched the tactical display with her heart hammering against her ribs. The blue icons representing the Rangers had not moved in over an hour. The red icon, representing the fortified enemy position, pulsed with threat. Somewhere on the eastern ridge, a single green marker showed Vasquez's last known location. Colonel Hayes stood behind Torres, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the same display. No one in the communications center spoke. No one moved. They were all holding their breath, waiting for something they could not see to happen in a place they could not reach. Reeves stood apart from the others, his face unreadable. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it to himself. On the ridge, Vasquez watched the wind. A gust swept across the valley, rustling the sparse vegetation on the slope below her. She felt it tug at her sleeve, felt it whisper across the barrel of her rifle. 12 knots, maybe 14. Too strong. She waited. The gust faded. The air settled. For a moment, perhaps 3 seconds, the wind dropped to something manageable. Something she could calculate. Something she could beat. Vasquez exhaled slowly, letting the breath flow out of her lungs in a controlled stream. Her heartbeat slowed. The space between beats stretched into something vast and quiet. In that stillness between one heartbeat and the next, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The report echoed across the valley, a sharp crack that announced her presence to anyone listening. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, spinning through the cold mountain air, beginning its long journey toward a window 2 kilometers away. Vasquez kept her eye on the scope. She watched the bullet's path through instinct and experience, tracking the invisible trajectory as it arced across the valley. 2 seconds, 2.5, the longest moments of her life. The bullet dropped. It curved with the residual wind. It bled velocity and energy as it fought against the air, and at the end of its flight, traveling at barely subsonic speed, it threaded through an 18-inch opening in a stone wall. Through her scope, Vasquez saw the result. The gunner behind the heavy machine gun jerked once and collapsed. A moment later, the window flashed with secondary light. The round had struck something volatile. Ammunition. Explosives. The contents of the room ignited in a chain reaction that blew out the windows on two sides of the building. Fire erupted from the fortified position. Smoke poured into the afternoon sky. The heavy gun that had held 12 Rangers hostage fell silent forever. Vasquez allowed herself one breath. One moment of something that was not quite satisfaction, but close enough to feel like relief. Then she keyed her radio. Gun is down. Move now. In the village, Webb saw the building erupt before he heard the distant crack of the rifle shot. One moment the machine gun was covering the extraction route. The next, flames were pouring from the windows and the gun was silent. He did not hesitate. Move, he shouted. Everyone move now. Get Morrison to the extraction point. The Rangers surged into motion. Four men grabbed Morrison's stretcher and sprinted for the road. Others provided cover, weapons trained on the burning building in case anyone emerged. The courtyard that had been a kill zone for the past 3 hours became an escape route in the span of a heartbeat. Webb ran with them, checking his flanks, watching for threats that never materialized. The enemy fighters in the fortified building were dead or scattered. The ones who had retreated earlier showed no signs of returning. The ambush that should have killed his entire squad had been broken by a single shot from a ridge 2 kilometers away. They reached the extraction point in under 2 minutes. The road opened up before them, clear and empty, leading toward the QRF that was finally pushing through the valley. Webb could see the vehicles in the distance, dust plumes rising behind them as they raced to the link-up. Okonkwo appeared at his side, breathing hard, a grin splitting his face despite the exhaustion and fear of the past hours. We made it, he said. We actually made it. Webb looked back at the village, at the burning building, at the bodies scattered across the landscape, at the ridge where somewhere, hidden in the rocks, a woman with a rifle had saved their lives. We made it, he agreed, because someone made sure we would. He keyed his radio one more time, broadcasting on the frequency where he had first heard that calm female voice. Unknown element, this is Ranger 26. Extraction is complete. All personnel accounted for. He paused, searching for words that could express what he was feeling. Words that did not exist in any tactical manual. Whoever you are, he said finally, thank you. You gave us our lives back. Every single one of us. Static answered him. Then, after a long moment, 3 words in that same quiet voice. Get them home. Webb smiled. That was exactly what he intended to do. The QRF vehicles roared into the extraction point in a cloud of dust and diesel exhaust. Doors flew open before the trucks had fully stopped, soldiers pouring out with weapons ready, scanning for threats that had already been eliminated. Webb met the QRF leader, a sergeant named Callahan, in the middle of the road. The 2 men exchanged a quick handshake that said more than words could. Morrison, Webb said immediately. Critical casualty, got shot, needs surgery now. Callahan was already waving forward the medics. On it. Medevac is 8 minutes out. We have him stabilized until then. The medics descended on Morrison's stretcher with practiced efficiency. 4 lines went in. Vitals were checked. Fresh bandages replaced the blood-soaked ones that had kept him alive for the past 3 hours. Morrison's eyes fluttered open as they worked, finding Webb's face in the chaos. Staff Sergeant, he whispered, do we make it? Webb knelt beside the stretcher and gripped the young soldier's hand. We made it private. All of us. You're going to see Georgia again. Morrison tried to smile. The effort seemed to exhaust him, and his eyes closed again. But his hands squeezed Webb's once before going slack. He was still breathing, still fighting, still holding on. Callahan appeared at Webb's shoulder. What the hell happened out there? We monitored your transmissions. You were pinned, outgunned, and then suddenly the enemy just collapsed. Our intel is saying 15 plus enemy Kia from precision fire. Who was shooting? Webb stood and looked toward the eastern ridge. The sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the rocks in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere up there, hidden among the stones, was the answer to Callahan's question. I do not know, Webb admitted. Someone came on our frequency told us to stay down, and then started dropping enemy fighters like she was swatting flies. Command would not tell us who it was, just that we had Overwatch. She, Callahan repeated. A woman? That is what it sounded like. Webb shook his head slowly. Whoever she is, she made shots I did not think were possible. That last one, the fortified building that had to be close to 2,000 meters. Through a window. One round. Callahan let out a low whistle. That is not shooting. That is sorcery. A shout went up from one of the perimeter guards. Movement on the ridge. Single figure descending. Weapons came up instinctively, then lowered as the figure resolved into clarity. A lone soldier, moving down the rocky slope with the careful gait of someone who had spent the past several hours pushing their body to its limits. A rifle was slung across their back. No visible threat. No hostile intent. Webb watched the figure approach. As the distance closed, details emerged. Medium height. Compact build. The distinctive silhouette of a long rifle against the darkening sky. And something in the way she moved, a controlled economy of motion that spoke of training and experience and absolute confidence. She reached the valley floor and kept walking. Straight toward the extraction point. Straight toward the rangers she had saved. Okonkwo moved to stand beside Webb. Both men watched in silence as the shooter crossed the final 100 meters. She walked like she owned the ground beneath her feet, like this valley and everyone in it belonged to her by right of conquest, which Webb thought they did. She had earned it, shot by shot, life by life. She reached the group and stopped. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rangers stared at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The QRF soldiers looked from her to the ridge, to the burning building in the distance, trying to reconcile what they were seeing with what they knew was possible. Vasquez did not seem to notice the attention. Her eyes moved across the group, assessing, cataloging. They lingered on the wounded, on the medics working over Morrison, on the blood that stained the uniforms and bandages of men who had come within minutes of dying. She walked to the stretcher and knelt beside it. One of the medics started to object, then thought better of it when he saw her face. She looked down at Morrison, at this young soldier she had never met, whose life she had fought to save from 2 kilometers away. How is he? She asked quietly. The medic answered. Stable for now. Lost a lot of blood, but the bleeding is controlled. If we get him to surgery in the next hour, he has a good chance. Vasquez nodded once. She reached out and touched Morrison's shoulder, a brief contact, almost gentle. Then she stood and turned to face Webb. He stepped forward, up close. He could see the exhaustion carved into her features, the dust that coated her uniform, the sweat stains and the scratches from scrambling across rocky terrain. She had pushed herself to the edge of human endurance, and she was still standing, still ready. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, he said, 2nd Ranger Battalion, and you are the reason my men are alive. Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez, she replied. Delta, currently unassigned. Webb almost laughed at the understatement. Unassigned, as if she had wandered into this valley by accident, as if she had not just executed one of the most remarkable displays of precision shooting in the history of modern warfare. Sergeant Vasquez, he said, I have been a ranger for 12 years. I have seen a lot of things. Good shooters. Great shooters. What you did today goes beyond anything I thought was possible. He extended his hand. Thank you, he said. That is not enough. Those words are not big enough for what you gave us. But it is all I have. Thank you for our lives. Vasquez looked at his hand for a moment. Something flickered behind her eyes, an emotion she did not let reach her face. As she took his hand and gripped it firmly. You held, she said simply. Your squad held under fire for 3 hours with no support and dwindling ammunition. You kept your men alive long enough for help to arrive. I just pulled the trigger. You did the hard part. Webb shook his head. We were ready to die in that village. Every one of us had made peace with it. Then your voice came on the radio, and everything changed. Vasquez released his hand. Her gaze drifted to the ridge, to the path she had climbed and descended, to the positions where she had lain in the rocks and delivered death to men who wanted to kill Americans. 23 rounds, she said quietly. 23 targets. Webb understood what she was telling him. 23 shots. 23 kills. Not a single round wasted. Not a single miss in conditions that would have challenged any sniper on the planet. He looked at this woman, this unassigned operator who had walked into a war zone alone because someone had told her she was not allowed to help. He looked at the rifle on her back and the calm in her eyes and the absolute certainty in her bearing. "Sergeant Vasquez," he said, "when we get back to base, I'm going to find whoever decided you should be cleaning weapons instead of doing this. And I'm going to have some words with them." Vasquez almost smiled. "You might have to get in line." The sound of rotors reached them from the east. The medevac helicopter was inbound, lights blinking against the darkening sky. Morrison was going to make it. They were all going to make it, because a woman with a rifle had refused to let them die. The helicopter touched down at FOB Vanguard as the last light faded from the sky. Vasquez was the first one off, stepping onto the tarmac with her rifle slung across her back and 3 months of exile written in the set of her shoulders. Captain Reeves was waiting for her. He stood at the edge of the landing zone with 2 MPs flanking him, his uniform crisp, his posture rigid, his face arranged into an expression of official authority. The message was clear. Whatever she had done in that valley, whatever lives she had saved, she had disobeyed a direct order. There would be consequences. "Sergeant Vasquez," he began, his voice cutting through the rotor wash, "you are hereby ordered to surrender your weapon and submit to detention pending a full investigation into your unauthorized departure from this base and your unsanctioned involvement in combat operations. You have the right to remain silent and to request legal counsel. Do you understand these rights?" Vasquez stopped walking. She looked at Reeves. She looked at the MPs. She looked at the handcuffs one of them was already reaching for. Behind her, the Rangers were climbing out of the helicopter. Webb appeared at her side, his face dark with anger. "What the hell is this, Captain?" "This does not concern you, Staff Sergeant." Reeves kept his eyes on Vasquez. Sergeant Vasquez violated direct orders and left this base without authorization. She will be held accountable for her actions. Her actions saved 12 lives, Webb shot back, including mine, including Private Morrison, who is in surgery right now because she bought us the time to get him out. Reeves did not respond. The MPs moved forward. Then a voice crackled through every radio on the tarmac, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Captain Reeves, this is Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. Stand down immediately. That is a direct order." Reeves froze. The MPs froze. Everyone on the landing zone turned toward the communications tower, as if they could see the woman whose voice had just stopped time. "Colonel Hayes," Reeves said carefully, keying his radio, "I am executing lawful detention of an AWOL soldier who violated the chain of command during active combat operations." "You are executing nothing," Hayes replied. "Sergeant Vasquez acted under my authority. I assumed tactical command of operations in the Kringle Valley 3 hours ago, and everything she did from that point forward was sanctioned by regional command. Release her immediately, or I will have you relieved before your next breath." The silence that followed was absolute. Vasquez watched Reeves's face as the reality of his situation settled over him. He had been prepared to arrest her. He had been prepared to make an example of her insubordination. And now he was being told, in front of his own soldiers, that he had no authority to do any of it. He lowered his radio. His jaw worked silently. Then he turned and walked away without another word, the MPs trailing behind him like confused shadows. Webb let out a breath. That was satisfying. Vasquez said nothing. She walked off the tarmac and headed for the armory, leaving the Rangers behind. An hour later, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes landed at FOB Vanguard in a command helicopter. She did not announce her arrival. She did not request an escort. She simply walked into the base headquarters and asked where she could find Captain Reeves. The meeting took place behind closed doors. No one heard what was said, but when Reeves emerged 20 minutes later, something fundamental had changed in him. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were hollow. He walked past the soldiers in the corridor without acknowledging them. A man who had just learned that his career was over. Hayes found Vasquez exactly where she expected to find her. The armory was quiet. A single work light illuminated the cleaning station where Vasquez sat, her hands moving through the familiar motions of disassembling a rifle. She did not look up when Hayes entered. She did not acknowledge the colonel's presence at all. Hayes stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. This woman had walked into a war zone alone, killed 23 enemy fighters, saved 12 American lives, and made a shot that would be studied in sniper schools for decades. And now she was back in the same room where she had been exiled, doing the same meaningless work she had been assigned as punishment. Private Morrison is out of surgery, Hayes said. The doctors say he's going to make it. Full recovery expected. Vasquez's hands paused on the rifle. Her shoulders dropped slightly, releasing tension she had been carrying since the valley. She still did not look up, but Hayes could see the effect of the news in the small loosening of her posture. That matters, Vasquez said quietly. That was the one I was not sure about. Hayes crossed the room and pulled a chair up to the workbench. She sat down across from Vasquez, close enough to see the exhaustion in her face, the dust still clinging to her uniform, the scratches on her hands from scrambling across mountain rocks. I read your file, Hayes said. All of it, including the classified annexes about Kandahar. Vasquez's hands resumed their work. Her expression did not change. 12 civilians, Hayes continued. 4 of them children. You were ordered not to engage. You disobeyed. They lived because you made a choice that command was too afraid to make. The rifle clicked back together. Vasquez set it aside and finally met Hayes's eyes. And I was punished for it, she said. 3 months in this room. My career frozen. My judgment questioned by men who have never fired a shot outside a training range. Hayes nodded slowly. You were punished. And you were right. Both of those things are true, and only one of them should have happened. She leaned forward. I am reinstating you to full operational status, effective immediately. The reprimand in your file will be removed. Your record will reflect what actually happened in Kandahar, that you acted to save civilian lives in accordance with the laws of armed conflict and the highest traditions of military service. Vasquez absorbed this in silence. Her face remained neutral, but something shifted behind her eyes. A door opening after a long time in the dark. What about the next one, she asked. Hayes frowned. The next one? The next operator who does the right thing and gets punished for it. The next soldier who sees civilians about to die and is told not to intervene. What happens to them? Hayes did not have an easy answer. She was a colonel, not a general. She could fix one injustice. She could not fix a system. I will push for a review, she said finally. Cases like yours, operators sidelined from making hard calls that command was not willing to support. It will not be fast. It will not be easy. But I will push. Vasquez considered this. It was not a promise of transformation. It was not a guarantee that the next Elena Vasquez would be treated any differently. But it was something, a start, a crack in the wall. Okay, she said. A knock at the armory door interrupted them. Torres stood in the doorway, her face uncertain. Colonel Hayes. Sergeant Vasquez. The Rangers are asking to see her. All of them. They're waiting outside. Vasquez looked at Hayes, and for the first time since the valley, something like uncertainty crossed her features. She had been trained to fight. She had not been trained for this. Hayes stood and placed a hand on Vasquez's shoulder. You saved their lives, she said. Let them thank you. That is not weakness. That is letting people be human. Vasquez took a breath. Then she stood, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the door. Vasquez stepped out of the armory and stopped. 12 Rangers stood in formation on the dusty ground outside. The wounded ones were propped up by their brothers, arms over shoulders, refusing to miss this moment. Private Morrison lay on a stretcher at the front of the group, fresh from surgery, pale as paper but conscious. He had insisted on being there. The medics had tried to stop him. They had failed. Webb stood at the head of the formation. When he saw Vasquez emerge, he called his men to attention. 12 soldiers straightened as one, a ripple of discipline and respect that cut through the exhaustion and pain of the day. Vasquez stood frozen in the doorway. She had faced enemy fighters without hesitation. She had made shots that bordered on impossible. But this, standing before the men whose lives she had saved, receiving their gratitude, felt like walking into unknown territory without a map. Webb stepped forward and stopped 2 paces in front of her. His voice carried across the quiet evening air. Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez. This afternoon, my squad was trapped in a kill zone with no way out. We had 3 wounded, 1 critical. We were low on ammunition and out of options. Every one of us had accepted that we were not going home. He paused. Then you came on our frequency. You told us to stay down. And from 2 kilometers away, you systematically destroyed an enemy force that outnumbered you 30-1. You killed their machine gunners. You killed their commander. You killed the hunting party they sent after you. And when the last of them fortified in a position we could not touch, you made a shot that should not be possible and blew them to hell. The Rangers behind him were nodding. Some had tears in their eyes. These were hard men, soldiers who had seen combat and death and everything in between. And they were looking at Vasquez like she was something they had never encountered before. Webb continued. 23 rounds. 23 kills. Not a single miss. You saved 12 American lives today, Sergeant Vasquez. You gave us back to our families. And on behalf of every man standing here, I want to say what none of us will ever be able to say enough. He snapped to attention and rendered a salute so crisp it could have cut glass. Thank you. Behind him, 12 Rangers raised their hands in unison. 12 salutes, offered to a woman who had been told she was not fit for duty. 12 lives, returned to the world because she had refused to accept that judgment. Vasquez felt something crack inside her chest, something she had been holding together for 3 months through the humiliation and the isolation and the endless days of meaningless work. She had told herself it did not matter. She had told herself she did not need their approval, their gratitude, their recognition. She had been wrong. She returned the salute. Her hand was steady. Her voice was not. You held for 3 hours, she said, outgunned and surrounded, with no guarantee that help was coming. You kept your men alive. You kept Morrison alive. I pulled the trigger from a safe distance. You did the hard part. Webb lowered his salute. The hint of a smile crossed his face. We can argue about that later. Right now, my men want to meet the woman who saved their lives. The formation broke. Rangers crowded around her, shaking her hand, clapping her shoulder, offering thanks in a dozen different ways. Okonkwo told her about the moment the machine gun went silent. Davis described watching the hunting party get annihilated on the ridge. Jennings, the young private who had nearly panicked in the kill zone, simply stood before her and said 2 words, "Thank you." Then he walked away before she could see him cry. Morrison's stretcher was brought forward. The young soldier looked up at her with eyes that held too much for someone his age. He had stared at death today. He had felt it reaching for him. And then a stranger on a radio had pushed it back. "Sergeant Vasquez," he said, his voice weak but clear. "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead, Private. When I get home, when this is all over, I'm going to marry my girlfriend. And we're going to have kids someday." He swallowed. "If our first one is a girl, I would like to name her Elena. If that is okay with you." Vasquez looked down at this young man she had never met until an hour ago. This soldier who had been bleeding out in a village halfway around the world while she scrambled across a mountain to save him. She thought about all the people she had not been able to save, the ones who haunted her, the ones she carried. Today, she had carried 12 men out of the darkness. That had to count for something. "I would be honored," she said. Morrison smiled. It was the last thing he did before the painkillers pulled him back under. The crowd gradually dispersed. Rangers drifted toward the barracks, toward food and rest, and the slow process of recovering from what they had survived. Webb lingered, exchanging a few final words with Vasquez before following his men. Promises were made. Contact information exchanged. The bond forged in that valley would not break easily. Eventually, Vasquez found herself alone on the FOB perimeter, watching the sun sink below the mountains. The same mountains she had climbed that afternoon. The same valley where she had lain in the rocks and done what she was born to do. Torres found her there as the stars began to emerge. The specialist stood beside her in silence for a while, 2 women looking out at the darkness beyond the wire. When Torres finally spoke, her voice was soft. "What are you thinking about?" Vasquez considered the question. The honest answer was complicated. The honest answer involved years of service and sacrifice, moments of triumph and failure, faces she would never forget, and names she could not speak without pain. "I'm thinking about the ones I could not save," she said. "Kandahar. Other places. Other times. The faces that stay with me." Torres nodded slowly. She understood. Everyone who served long enough accumulated ghosts. "But today you saved 12, Torres said. "That has to count for something." Vasquez turned to look at her. This young specialist who had kept her secret, who had given her the chance to reach that valley, who had believed in her when command had not. "It does," Vasquez said. "It counts for a lot." They stood together in the darkness, watching the stars multiply overhead. Somewhere behind them, the base hummed with activity. Somewhere ahead, the mountains held their secrets. And somewhere in between, a woman who had been thrown away had proven that the measure of a soldier was not in the opinions of officers or the contents of personnel file. It was in the lives you saved, the choices you made, the moments when you refused to stand by and let people die. The story did not end on that perimeter. Colonel Hayes kept her promise. The review she initiated uncovered 3 other operators who had been sidelined for similar reasons, soldiers punished for making hard calls that saved lives. All 3 were reinstated. Captain Reeves faced a formal inquiry that ended his career. Webb was promoted 6 months later, and Vasquez was there when he pinned on his new rank. The Rangers called her their guardian angel after that day. She never liked the title. Angels were divine. Angels were perfect. She was neither. She was a soldier who had made a choice, who had looked at the rules and the orders and the consequences, and decided that 12 lives mattered more than her career. Every time, she would make the same choice again. Now let me ask you something before we wrap this up. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you? Where they looked at you and decided you were not worth their time or their trust? Maybe it was a boss. Maybe it was a teacher. Maybe it was someone who should have known better. Tell me about it in the comments. Tell me about the moment you proved them wrong. Because that is what Elena Vasquez did in that valley. She took everything they said about her, all the doubts and the dismissals and the official reprimands, and she turned it into 23 shots that changed 12 lives forever. Sometimes the people who see us the clearest are strangers. And sometimes the people who should trust us the most are the ones holding us back. The question is what you do when that happens. Do you accept their judgment? Or do you walk into the fire anyway, because you know who you are, even if they do not? Vasquez knew, and 12 Rangers came home because of it.